The baby kangaroo shouldn't have been alone. That was Ronald Morby's first thought when he saw the small Joey bouncing frantically across the blistering highway, straight toward his truck. He slammed the brakes. Red dust exploded into the air as his tires skidded across the asphalt. The truck shuddered to a stop just meters from the tiny creature. But the Joey didn't flee. It stood there in a heat shimmer, chest heaving, staring directly at Ronald with dark, pleading eyes. Then it did something that would change both their lives forever. It hopped closer. This is true animal heroes. And if stories of courage, nature, and impossible rescues move you, subscribe and come along for the journey. Ronald sat motionless behind the wheel, engine ticking in the silence. He was 46 years old, a logistics coordinator from Brisbane, Australia, who'd spent the last decade driving supply routes through Queensland's Outback. He knew these roads. He knew the wildlife. And he knew Joey's this young never traveled alone. The baby kangaroo couldn't have been more than 4 months old. Its fur was still soft and pale, its movements unsteady. It should have been tucked safely in its mother's pouch, not standing exposed on scorching bitumen in the middle of nowhere. Ronald opened his door slowly. The heat hit him like a physical force. It was late January, peak summer, and the thermometer on his dashboard read 42 degrees Celsius. "Easy there, little one," he said softly. The Joey's ears twitched. Instead of bolting, it took 3 awkward hops toward him. Ronald's stomach tightened. Something was very wrong. He scanned the surrounding scrubland. Eucalyptus trees stood like gray sentinels in the distance. The roadside was littered with spinifex grass and red earth. No movement. No mother kangaroo anywhere. The Joey reached his boots and stopped. Then it did something Ronald had never seen in 15 years of outback driving. It placed both tiny paws on his shin and looked up at him, not with fear, with desperation. Ronald crouched down. The Joey immediately pressed against his chest, trembling despite the heat. Its small body was alarmingly thin. He could feel its ribs beneath the fur. "Where's your mom?" Ronald whispered. The Joey made a soft chittering sound. Then it pulled away, hopped 3 meters down the road, and stopped. It looked back at Ronald with those dark eyes, waiting. Ronald's pulse quickened. He'd heard stories. Aboriginal elders he'd met on his routes spoke of how animals sometimes led humans to their injured, but he'd always dismissed them as folklore. Now, standing in the furnace heat with a desperate Joey staring at him, those stories didn't seem so far-fetched. Ronald grabbed his water bottle and emergency kit from the truck. "All right," he said. "Show me." The Joey turned and began hopping off the road toward the scrubland. Ronald followed. He had no idea that this decision would lead him into a nightmare he'd barely survive. The Joey moved with surprise and determination for something so young. It hopped through the spinifex, around termite mounds, under low-hanging branches. Ronald followed, sweat already soaking through his shirt. The sun was merciless. Every few meters, the Joey would stop and look back, making sure Ronald was still there. They'd been walking for 20 minutes when Ronald noticed the tracks. Large kangaroo prints in the red earth, heading in the same direction. Adult female, he estimated. The stride was uneven, though, dragging slightly on the left side. Injured, the pieces were falling into place. An injured mother, unable to keep up with the mob. A Joey too young to survive alone. Somehow, the little one had found the courage to seek help from the one thing it should fear most. A human. Ronald's respect for the tiny creature grew. They pressed deeper into the bush. The landscape shifted from sparse scrubland to denser woodland. Ironbark and bloodwood trees provided patches of shade, but the heat barely lessened. Ronald rationed his water carefully. He had maybe a liter left. The Joey showed no signs of stopping. After another 30 minutes, Ronald noticed something that made his skin prickle. The Joey had started circling. It hopped around a particular stand of trees twice, then 3 times. Its movements became erratic. It sniffed the ground, chittered anxiously, then sat back on its haunches. The confidence was gone. Ronald's heart sank as he understood. The Joey was lost. It had led him this far on instinct and memory, but now the trail had gone cold. The small creature looked up at Ronald with an expression that seemed almost human. Confusion, fear, helplessness. "It's okay," Ronald said, kneeling beside it. "We'll figure this out." He examined the ground more carefully. The tracks were there, but faint. Wind and heat had eroded them. He followed the most distinct prints 20 meters north. There, he found something that gave him hope. A patch of flattened grass. The mother had rested here, probably collapsed from exhaustion. The depression was recent, no more than a few hours old, and the tracks continued from there, heading northwest. Ronald stood and looked in that direction. Dense eucalyptus forest, rocky outcrops, and in the distance, the faint sound of running water. A creek. If the mother was injured and dehydrated, she'd head for water. Ronald turned to the Joey. "Come on. I think I know where she went." The Joey hopped to his side immediately, pressing close to his leg. They walked together into the shadows of the forest. Ronald didn't see the warning signs until it was too late. The fresh dingo tracks circling the area. The forest thickened around them. Ancient eucalyptus trees towered overhead, their bark peeling in long strips. The air smelled of sap and dry earth. Ronald's boots crunched over fallen branches and seed pods. The Joey stayed close now, occasionally bumping against his leg as if seeking reassurance. Ronald's unease grew with each step. It was too quiet. In healthy bushland, you heard birds, kookaburras, cockatoos, magpies. But here, there was only silence broken by the distant sound of water. Then he saw them, tracks in a patch of bare earth. Canine prints, but larger than a domestic dog, for distinct sets moving in a coordinated pattern. Dingoes, and they were fresh, maybe an hour old. Ronald stopped, his mind racing. Dingoes were opportunistic hunters. An injured kangaroo would be easy prey, but they were also cautious around humans. Usually, the Joey chittered nervously, sensing his tension. Ronald pulled out his phone. No signal. He was too deep in the bush, too far from any tower. He checked his supplies. Half a bottle of water, a utility knife, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. Not exactly equipped for a dingo encounter. He considered turning back, taking the Joey to a wildlife rescue center in town, coming back with proper equipment and help. But something stopped him. The image of an injured mother kangaroo, alone and vulnerable, possibly surrounded by predators. If she was still alive, she wouldn't last much longer. Ronald made his decision. "We keep going," he said to the Joey, "but we stay alert." They moved forward, but now Ronald scanned the forest constantly. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound made him tense. The sound of water grew louder. After another 15 minutes, the trees opened up and Ronald saw it. A creek bed about 30 meters across. But this wasn't the life-giving stream he'd hoped for. The creek was nearly dry. Just a thin trickle of water ran down the center, barely enough to wet the stones. The drought had hit this area hard. What should have been a flowing waterway was now just cracked earth and exposed rock. But there were fresh kangaroo tracks leading down to the water's edge. Ronald's pulse quickened. He scanned the creek bed, searching. That's when he saw her. About 50 meters downstream, partially hidden by a fallen log, was a large female kangaroo. She was lying on her side, completely still. The Joey saw her too. It made a desperate sound, a high-pitched cry that echoed across the empty creek bed. Ronald started moving toward her. Then he saw the other shapes. For dingoes, positioned on the opposite bank, watching the fallen kangaroo. Waiting. Ronald froze. The dingoes hadn't noticed him yet. They were focused entirely on the injured female, patient as only predators can be. The Joey tried to hop forward, toward his mother, but Ronald grabbed it gently. "Not yet," he whispered. One wrong move, and those dingoes would attack. They might not be afraid of one unarmed man, especially if they were hungry enough. Ronald needed a plan. He looked around desperately, searching for anything he could use. His eyes landed on a dead branch, thick as his forearm. He picked it up carefully, testing its weight. Better than nothing. Then he noticed something that changed everything. Behind the dingoes, barely visible in the late afternoon shadows, was a den entrance, and sitting outside it were three small shapes. Pups. Ronald's blood ran cold. These weren't just opportunistic hunters waiting for an easy meal. They were parents protecting their territory and feeding their young, which made them infinitely more dangerous. The joey struggled in his grip, crying for its mother. One of the dingo's heads snapped in their direction. Their eyes locked. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then the lead dingo's lips pulled back in a snarl. The standoff lasted seconds that felt like minutes. Ronald slowly stood upright, making himself as large as possible. He raised a branch in both hands, ready to swing. The lead dingo took 1 step forward, then another. The other 3 dingoes began spreading out, flanking positions. They'd done this before. They knew how to hunt as a pack. Ronald's mind raced. He couldn't fight 4 adult dingoes. Even with the branch, he'd be torn apart in seconds. But he couldn't run either. Not while carrying the joey. Not while the mother lay helpless downstream. He needed to shift the dynamic. "Hey!" Ronald shouted, his voice exploding across the creek bed. He banged the branch against a rock, creating a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. The dingoes hesitated. Ronald didn't wait. He scooped the joey up with one arm, keeping the branch raised with the other, and started backing away slowly. Never turn your back on a predator. The lead dingo growled, a low rumble that raised the hair on Ronald's neck. Then it charged. Ronald swung the branch with everything he had. It connected with the dingo's shoulder, sending the animal tumbling sideways with a yelp. The other dingoes rushed forward. Ronald ran. He crashed through the underbrush. The joey clutched to his chest, branches whipping his face. Behind him, he could hear the dingoes giving chase, their paws thundering against the earth. He had maybe seconds before they overtook him. Ronald's boot caught on a root. He stumbled, nearly fell, caught himself against a tree. The dingoes were right behind him. Then he saw it, a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Ronald dove for it. He pushed through the gap, the rough stone scraping his shoulders. The joey squeaked in protest as they squeezed into the tight space. Behind him, the lead dingo hit the gap at full speed. It tried to follow, wedging its shoulders between the rocks, snapping and snarling, but it couldn't fit. The dingo's teeth snapped centimeters from Ronald's leg as he pulled himself through to the other side. He emerged into a small clearing surrounded by rock walls, a natural alcove formed by ancient geological forces, and he was trapped. There was no other exit. The dingoes circled the boulder formation, searching for another way in. Their shadows moved across the gaps in the rocks. Ronald sank to the ground, his back against the stone wall, the joey trembling in his arms. His heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat poured down his face. He bought himself time, but not safety. The dingoes weren't leaving, not with an easy meal, just downstream and strangers in their territory. They would wait. Ronald checked his watch. 4:47 p.m. The sun would set in maybe 2 hours. Once darkness fell, the dingoes would have every advantage. He had to figure something out before then. The joey looked up at him with those trusting eyes. Ronald stroked its head gently. "I'll get us out of this," he promised, "and we'll get to your mom." But sitting there in the fading light, trapped between rocks with predators circling outside, Ronald had no idea how he was going to keep that promise. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze. Not the dingoes outside. Something else, coming from the darkness at the back of the alcove. A hiss, long and slow and venomous. Ronald's flashlight beam swept across the rocks and froze on a coiled shape in the corner. A king brown snake, one of the most venomous serpents in Australia. And Ronald had just trapped himself in its den. The snake's head rose slowly, tongue flicking. Ronald didn't move, didn't breathe. King browns were notoriously aggressive when cornered. And right now, the snake was definitely cornered. Its escape route was blocked by Ronald and the joey. The reptile was massive, at least 2 meters long, its bronze scales gleaming in the flashlight beam. Outside, the dingoes continued circling, but that threat seemed distant now. The snake was 3 meters away. 1 strike distance. The Joey sensed a danger and went completely still in Ronald's arms, some primal instinct telling it not to move. Ronald's mind raced through his limited options. He couldn't go back through the gap without exposing his legs to the snake. He couldn't attack it with a branch without getting within strike range. And he couldn't just wait it out because the sun was setting and the dingoes weren't leaving. Then he remembered something. A conversation with an old Aboriginal guide named Jack during a supply run 2 years ago. They'd been talking about snake encounters in the bush. They don't want to fight Ron. Jack had said they want an escape route. Give them space and time. They'll take it. Ronald slowly, very slowly, began moving sideways along the rock wall, creating an opening between himself and the gap in the boulders. The snake watched him, body tensing. Ronald froze again. Waited. After 30 seconds, the snake's head lowered slightly. Ronald took another slow step sideways. The snake remained coiled, but its attention shifted toward the gap. Ronald kept moving, inch by inch, opening up more space. The snake's tongue flicked rapidly, tasting the air. Then, like water flowing, the serpent uncoiled and slithered rapidly toward the gap. It disappeared through the opening in seconds. Ronald heard a sudden commotion outside, yelps and scrambling. The dingoes had scattered when the king brown emerged. Snakes and dingoes avoided each other when possible. Ronald sagged against the wall, adrenaline making his hands shake. But he couldn't rest. The sun was lower now, painting the rocks in shades of orange and red. He had maybe an hour of good light left. He needed a different plan. Ronald climbed up onto one of the boulders, getting a better view of the area. From this vantage point, he could see the creek bed, the dingo den, and the spot where the mother kangaroo lay. She still hadn't moved, but her chest was rising and falling. She was alive. The dingoes had regrouped near their den, wary now, but still watching. Ronald studied the terrain carefully. The creek bed curved around a rocky outcrop about 200 meters downstream. If he could reach that point, he'd be out of sight of the den. He could circle back to the mother from the other direction. But getting there meant crossing open ground with the Joey. Then Ronald noticed something. The wind had picked up. Dark clouds were building on the western horizon, moving fast. A storm was coming. In the Outback, summer storms could be violent and unpredictable. Heavy rain, lightning, flash floods, and dry creek beds. Dangerous for anyone caught in the open, but also an opportunity. Dingoes, like most wild animals, sought shelter during storms. They'd retreat to their den to protect the pups. Ronald just had to survive until the storm hit. He checked his watch. 5:23 p.m. The clouds were moving fast, boiling black against the orange sky. He could smell rain on the wind. Maybe 20 minutes until it arrived. Ronald settled into the alcove to wait. The Joey curled against his chest. "Almost there," he whispered. "Just hold on." Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and ominous. The Joey's ears twitched nervously. Ronald stroked its head, trying to calm it, trying to calm himself. The dingoes had stopped circling. They were moving back toward their den, sensing the approaching storm. Ronald watched and waited. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, exploding against the rocks like bullets. The storm was here, and Ronald had no idea that the rain was about to create a danger far worse than dingoes or snakes. The dry creek bed was about to become a raging torrent, with the mother kangaroo directly in its path. The rain hit like a hammer. One moment, scattered drops. The next, a wall of water pouring from the sky. Ronald pressed deeper into the alcove as the deluge pounded the rocks around him. The Joey bared its face against his chest, soaked and shivering despite the warm rain. Lightning split the sky, followed instantly by thunder that shook the ground. The dingoes had vanished into their den. This was his chance. Ronald grabbed a branch and emerged from the alcove. Rain lashed his face, so heavy he could barely see 3 meters ahead. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in minutes. He stumbled toward the creek bed, boots slipping on wet rocks. Then he heard it, a sound that turned his blood to ice. A roar, deep and growing, coming from upstream. Ronald's head snapped in that direction, and his stomach dropped. A wall of brown water was rushing down the creek bed, carrying debris, branches, and boulders in its churning mass. The flash flood was moving at terrifying speed, devouring everything in its path. And the mother kangaroo was lying directly in its path, too injured to move. Ronald ran. He half slid, half fell down the creek bank. The joey clutched tight against his chest with one arm. The roar of approaching water grew louder, drowning out even the thunder. 30 seconds until impact. Maybe less. Ronald reached the mother kangaroo. She lifted her head weakly, eyes glazed with pain and exhaustion. Her left leg was clearly broken, twisted at an unnatural angle. No wonder she couldn't run. The joey squeaked desperately, reaching toward its mother. Ronald had no time to think, no time to plan. He grabbed the mother kangaroo under her forelegs and pulled with every ounce of strength he had. She was heavy, 40 kilograms at least. His boots slipped in the mud. The mother thrashed weakly, not understanding he was trying to help. The flood was 15 meters away. 10. Ronald screamed with effort, dragging the kangaroo toward the bank. 5 meters. He could see individual branches in the churning water, spinning like weapons. 3 meters. His boot found purchase on a rock. He hauled the mother up the slope, muscles screaming. The wall of water hit. It slammed into the spot where the mother had been lying second before, exploding across the creek bed with the force of a freight train. Ronald didn't stop. He pulled the mother the final meters up the bank, collapsing onto relatively flat ground just as the water surged past below them. The flood filled the entire creek bed within seconds, a churning brown mass 3 meters deep. If Ronald had been 30 seconds slower, they would all be dead. He lay on his back, chest heaving, rain pounding his face. The joey squirmed free and immediately hopped to its mother, nuzzling against her neck. The mother kangaroo's breathing was rapid and shallow. Her leg was badly broken, and she was severely dehydrated. But she was alive. Ronald sat up slowly, assessing their situation. They were on a small ledge above the flood, maybe 5 meters wide and 10 meters long. The water raged below them, impassable. The rain showed no signs of stopping. He was trapped on this ledge with 2 kangaroos, one critically injured, with night falling and a storm raging. His phone was waterlogged, useless. His flashlight had been lost somewhere in the chaos. He had no shelter, no dry clothes, no way to call for help, and the mother's condition was deteriorating. Ronald could see it in her eyes. The light was fading. She was slipping away. The joey seemed to sense it too. It pressed closer to its mother, making soft whimpering sounds. Ronald's throat tightened. He'd come all this way, survived dingoes and snakes and flash floods. He couldn't let her die now, but he had no medical supplies, no way to set her broken leg, no way to get her to a vet. He was just a man with a utility knife and an empty water bottle, trapped in a storm. Ronald looked at the mother kangaroo, at the joey press against her side. Then he made a decision. "I'm not giving up," he said, though the words were lost in the storm. Not on either of you. He stripped off his soaked shirt and draped it over the mother's body, providing what little warmth and protection he could. Then he sat beside them, forming a windbreak with his body. The joey nestled between them. All he could do now was wait. Wait for the storm to pass. Wait for dawn. Wait for a miracle. The rain pounded on. Lightning lit the landscape in stark flashes. And in those brief moments of light, Ronald saw something that gave him the first spark of hope he'd felt in hours. Across the flood-swollen creek, barely visible through the rain, was a light, a small, flickering light, moving through the trees. Someone was out there. Someone was searching. Ronald tried to shout, but his voice was lost in the storm. The light moved away, disappearing into the darkness. Ronald's hope guttered like a candle in wind. Then the joey did something extraordinary. It stood up, faced the direction of the light, and called out, not the soft chitter Ronald had heard before, a loud, piercing cry that somehow cut through the storm. The light stopped moving. Then it turned, coming toward them. The light grew stronger, resolving into a high-powered torch beam cutting through the rain. Ronald shouted again, waving his arms. "Here! We're here!" The beam swept across the creek, found them, and held steady A voice called out through the storm. "Hold on. I'm coming." But the flood still raged between them, brown water churning with deadly force. Ronald watched as the figure on the opposite bank assessed the situation. The torch beam swept up and downstream, searching. Then the light started moving upstream, away from them. "No," Ronald whispered. "Don't leave." But the person knew what they were doing. 200 meters upstream, where the creek narrowed and large boulders created natural stepping stones, the figure began crossing. It took several tense minutes, the person moving carefully from rock to rock, testing each step before committing weight. The water surged around the boulders, trying to sweep the crosser away. But they made it. The figure emerged on Ronald's side of the creek and jogged downstream toward them. As they approached, Ronald could make out more details. Aboriginal woman, maybe 60 years old, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and waterproof jacket. She carried a large pack on her back. She climbed up to the ledge and knelt beside them, shining her torch over the injured kangaroo. "Jack Henderson sent me," she said, raising her voice over the storm. "I'm Sarah Corey, Wildlife Rescue. He saw your truck abandoned on the highway and called it in. We've been searching for 3 hours." Ronald could have cried with relief. Sarah was already pulling supplies from her pack. A thermal blanket, medical kit, water bottle with electrolyte solution. She worked with practiced efficiency, first checking the mother kangaroo's vital signs. Her face was grim. "Severe dehydration, shock, and that leg needs surgery," she said. "But she's a fighter. I can stabilize her here, but we need to get her to the wildlife hospital in Toowoomba." "The flood," Ronald said. "We can't cross." Sarah nodded. "I radioed for a helicopter before I crossed. But they can't fly in this weather. We have to wait for the storm to break." She administered a subcutaneous fluid drip to the mother, setting up the four with practiced hands. Then she gave her a pain injection. "This will help," Sarah said. "But the next few hours are critical." She turned her attention to the Joey, checking it over. Despite the ordeal, the little one was in surprisingly good condition. "This one's tough," Sarah said, a slight smile on her weathered face. "Must get it from its mother." Then she looked at Ronald properly for the first time. "You're hypothermic," she stated, "and probably going to shock yourself." She pulled another thermal blanket from her pack and wrapped it around Ronald's shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. Ronald hadn't realized how cold he'd become. His whole body started shaking. Sarah pulled out a thermos and poured hot tea into a cup. "Drink this." Slowly. The hot liquid burned his throat, but it was the best thing Ronald had ever tasted. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what he'd been through hit him. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the cup. Sarah sat beside him, her presence calm and reassuring. "Jack told me about you," she said. "Said you were one of the good ones. Always respectful of country. Always careful with the wildlife." Ronald shook his head. "I just followed the Joey. That was brave. Stupid, maybe, but brave." Sarah smiled. "You could have driven past. Most people would have." The Joey had curled up against its mother, both of them now wrapped in thermal blankets. The mother's breathing had stabilized slightly with the fluids and pain medication. "Will she make it?" Ronald asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. She's very weak. The leg infection is advanced. Even if we get her to surgery." She didn't finish the sentence. They sat in silence, listening to the rain drumming on the rocks. "When I was young," Sarah said eventually, "my grandmother told me stories about the kangaroo people. She said they were the first jumpers, the ones who taught our ancestors to move across the land in long strides. She said they were sacred." Sarah looked at the mother and Joey. "When I see something like this, mother and child, fighting to survive, trusting a stranger to help, I understand what she meant." Ronald thought about the Joey's courage, hopping up to his truck despite every instinct telling it to flee, the mother's determination to survive despite her injuries, the incredible bond that had driven the little one to seek help. "They're remarkable," he said quietly. The Joey looked up at him with those dark eyes, and Ronald felt something shift in his chest. In the space of a few hours, this tiny creature had come to mean something to him. not just an animal in distress. Something more. The rain began to ease slightly. The thunder moved away, rumbling in the distance. Sarah checked her radio. Helicopters on standby. As soon as they get a weather window, they'll launch. She looked at the mother kangaroo. Just hold on a little longer. The joey chittered softly, as if understanding. Ronald reached out slowly and placed his hand on the joey's head. It leaned into his touch, accepting comfort. We've come this far together, Ronald said to the little kangaroo. We're not giving up now. The mother's eyes flickered open. For a moment, she looked directly at Ronald. And in that gaze, he saw something he'd never forget. Recognition, gratitude, trust. She knew he'd saved her. Save her baby. Then her eyes closed again, but her breathing was steady. Ronald sat there in the darkness with Sarah, watching over the two kangaroos, waiting for rescue. He didn't know it yet, but the hardest part of this journey was still to come, because what Sarah would discover in her examination would change everything. The rain stopped just before midnight. The clouds parted, revealing stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. The temperature dropped sharply, clear sky cold settling over the bush. Sarah's radio crackled to life. Wildlife rescue, this is Air Med 7. Weather window confirmed. En route to your coordinates. ETA 12 minutes. Copy that, Air Med 7, Sarah replied. Standing by. She turned to Ronald. They're coming. Ronald helped her prepare the mother kangaroo for transport. Sarah had fashioned a makeshift splint for the broken leg, using materials from her pack. The mother was sedated now, breathing slowly and regularly. The joey refused to leave its mother's side, pressing close against her neck. In the distance, Ronald heard the thump of rotor blades. The helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, spotlight blazing, illuminating the landscape like a small sun. It circled once, then set down in a clearing 50 meters away, rotor wash sending up sheets of spray from the wet ground. Two paramedics emerged with a stretcher, working together. They carefully loaded the mother kangaroo. The joey hopped frankly around them, distressed by the activity. You'll have to carry the little one, Sarah told Ronald. It won't go without you. Ronald scooped the joey into his arms. It calmed immediately, pressing against his chest. They ran through the rotor wash to the helicopter. Ronald climbed in first, then Sarah passed him the joey before climbing in herself. The paramedics secured the mother's stretcher and climbed aboard. Everyone in? Hold tight, the pilot called. The helicopter lifted, swaying slightly in the wind. Through the window, Ronald watched the flood-swollen creek fall away below them, looking like a dark snake writhing through the landscape. The flight to Toowoomba took 35 minutes. Sarah spent the entire time monitoring the mother kangaroo's vital signs, adjusting the foredrip, making notes on a tablet. Ronald watched her work, noting the growing concern on her face. What is it? He asked over the engine noise. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She checked the mother's leg wound again, shining her light on the inflamed tissue. Then she looked at Ronald, and he saw something in her eyes that scared him. When we get to the hospital, she said, I need to run some tests. Immediately. What kind of tests? Sarah hesitated. The infection pattern. It's unusual. I need to rule something out. Rule what out? Let's wait for the tests, Sarah said, but her expression told Ronald it was serious. The helicopter descended toward the wildlife hospital, a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Toowoomba. Lights blazed in the main building. A surgical team was waiting. They rushed the mother straight to surgery. Ronald stood in the hallway, still holding the joey, watching through a window as veterinarians worked on the kangaroo. The little one trembled in his arms, eyes fixed on its mother. Sarah disappeared into a laboratory with blood samples. Ronald waited. An hour passed. Then, too, the joey fell asleep against Ronald's chest, exhausted beyond measure. Ronald couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flood rushing toward them, felt the weight of the mother kangaroo as he dragged her to safety. Finally, Sarah emerged from the lab. Her face was pale. Ronald, we need to talk. They moved to a private consultation room. Sarah closed the door. The mother's out of surgery, she said. Her leg has been set. She's stable for now. That's good, Ronald said. But Sarah's expression told him there was more. The infection in her leg wasn't caused by the break, Sarah continued. She was bitten. Bitten? By what? A dingo. Ronald's blood ran cold. The pieces started falling into place. That's why she couldn't run, Sarah said. The bite was infected. The infection spread to the bone. She was already weak and sick when her leg broke. But she's going to be okay now, right? The surgery. The infection is advanced. We've started her on aggressive antibiotics, but... Sarah paused. There's something else. She pulled out her tablet, showing him test results. I ran a full blood panel. Ronald, this kangaroo has been exposed to a toxic substance. I found traces of 1080 poison in her system. Ronald felt like he'd been punched. 1080? The pesticide. Sarah nodded grimly. It's used legally for pest control, but it has to be strictly regulated. This concentration suggests an illegal bait station. There are poisoners out here. It happens. Ranchers who think they're protecting livestock. They put out illegal baits without proper safeguards. Wildlife gets poisoned. Ronald looked at the Joey sleeping in his arms. What about the baby? The baby's fine. It was protected in the pouch while still nursing. But the mother? Sarah's voice caught. She's been slowly dying for weeks. The poison, the bite, the infection, the broken leg. Any one of those things, she might have survived. All together. How long does she have? Sarah met his eyes. I don't know. Maybe days. Maybe hours. The surgery gave her a chance, but her body's been through too much. Ronald felt his throat constrict. After everything they'd been through, all the danger, all the struggle. What about the Joey? He asked. If the mother doesn't make it? It's old enough to survive on formula, Sarah said. 4 months, maybe close to 5. We'd hand raise it here until it's ready for release. It would take about 8 months. And then we release it back to wild. That's the goal. Ronald looked down at the sleeping Joey, this tiny creature that had hopped up to his truck with such desperate courage, that had led him on a journey that had nearly killed them both. Can I stay? Ronald asked. Until we know? Sarah nodded. Of course. They set up a cot in the observation room, where Ronald could see both the mother and Joey. The little one curled up on the cot beside him, one paw touching his arm. Ronald lay awake, staring at the ceiling. In the surgery room, machines beeped steadily, monitoring the mother's vital signs. Ronald tried to stay positive. She'd survived this long. She was a fighter, but deep down he knew. He'd seen that look in her eyes during the storm. She'd known then what he was only understanding now. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She'd fought to stay alive long enough for her baby to find help, and now the help had arrived. Her body was finally giving up. The machines beeped through the night, and Ronald waited for morning, dreading what it might bring. The sun rose over Toowoomba, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ronald woke to find Sarah standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder. He knew before she spoke. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly. The mother kangaroo had passed away 20 minutes earlier. Her heart had simply stopped, too weak to continue fighting. Ronald sat up slowly, careful not to wake the Joey still sleeping against his side. She lasted longer than we expected, Sarah said. The will to survive, it was remarkable. Ronald nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Would you like to see her? To say goodbye. They moved to the surgery room. The mother kangaroo looked peaceful now, the lines of pain finally gone from her face. Someone had cleaned her fur, removed the medical equipment. She looked like she was sleeping. Ronald stood beside her, one hand resting gently on her head. You were so brave, he whispered. And you were a good mother. The best. Your baby is safe now. I promise. The Joey had woken and followed him into the room. It hopped to its mother's side, nuzzling her neck, not understanding why she didn't respond. Sarah knelt beside the little kangaroo. I'm going to take care of you, she said. And when you're big and strong, we'll take you home. Back to the wild where you belong. Over the following weeks, Ronald visited the wildlife hospital every chance he got. He watched the Joey grow stronger. Sarah bottle-fed it, gradually introducing solid foods. The little kangaroo adapted well to routine, but it always perked up when Ronald arrived. Sarah showed him the proper techniques for care and feeding. "You have a gift for this," she said one afternoon. "The Joey trusts you completely." "We went through something together," Ronald said. "That creates a bond." During one visit, Sarah brought Ronald into her office. "I reported the 1080 poisoning to the authorities," she said. "They investigated and found 3 illegal bait stations on a property about 15 kilometers from where you found the mother. The owner has been charged." "Good," Ronald said. "How many animals do you think were affected?" Sarah's expression was somber. "There's no way to know. We found evidence of at least 6 other kangaroo deaths. Probably more we didn't find. Plus wallabies, native birds, even a wedge-tailed eagle." Ronald felt anger surge through him. All because someone wanted to protect their sheep? "Fear and ignorance," Sarah said. "But prosecuting cases like this sends a message. It's changing slowly. More ranchers are using non-lethal methods now. Education makes a difference." She pulled out a folder. "I wanted to show you something." Inside were photos, before and after shots of the Joey. In the first image, taken the night they arrived, the Joey looked tiny and frightened, matted with mud. In the recent photos, the Joey was noticeably larger, fur sleek and healthy, eyes bright and curious. "You helped save this little one's life," Sarah said. "That matters." Ronald studied the photos. "What happens next?" "We continue hand-raising for another few months. Then we'll move the Joey to a soft-release enclosure with other young kangaroos. They'll learn to socialize, to forage, to recognize threats. When we're confident it can survive independently, we'll release it. Where? A protected conservation area. Plenty of food and water, minimal human contact. We monitor them with tracking tags for the first 6 months." Ronald felt a mix of emotions. Pride that the Joey would return to the wild, but also sadness that their connection would end. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "You can be there for the release if you want. We usually invite rescuers to participate. It's a special moment." "I'd like that," Ronald said. 6 months later, on a warm July morning, Ronald drove out to the conservation area. Sarah was already there, along with a small team of wildlife carers. The Joey, much bigger now, nearly adolescent, was in a transport crate. "Ready?" Sarah asked Ronald. He nodded. They carried the crate to the edge of a large grassland area. Through the bars, Ronald could see the Joey's ears twitching, catching sounds and scent from the wild. Sarah opened the crate door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Joey hopped out slowly, cautiously. It looked around the open space, the other kangaroos visible in the distance. It turned and looked directly at Ronald. For several heartbeats, their eyes met. Ronald felt that same connection he'd felt the first time, when the desperate baby had hopped up to his truck. "Go on," he said softly. "You're home." The Joey turned away and began hopping across the grassland. Its movements were strong and confident now, nothing like the uncertain baby from months ago. It hopped faster, covering ground in powerful bounds. Other kangaroos raised their heads, watching the newcomer approach. One large female, the matriarch of the mob, hopped forward to investigate. She sniffed the young kangaroo carefully. After a moment, she accepted it into the group. The Joey looked back one last time toward where Ronald stood. Then it disappeared into the mob, becoming just another kangaroo in the wild landscape. Ronald stood there long after the others had left, watching the distant shapes of the kangaroo mob as they grazed and played. Sarah approached, 2 cups of tea in her hands. She offered one to Ronald. "You did good," she said. "We did good," Ronald corrected. "All of us." They stood in comfortable silence, drinking their tea. "I've been thinking," Ronald said eventually, "about what you said before, about having a gift for this." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I want to volunteer. Here at the hospital. I can't do what you do, obviously, but I could help with feeds, cleaning, whatever's needed. I have weekends free." Sarah smiled. "We'd be lucky to have you. Though I warn you, once you start, it's hard to stop. These animals get under your skin." Ronald thought about the Joey, about the trust in its eyes, about the incredible journey they'd shared. "I think they already have," he said. Over the next year, Ronald became a regular presence at the wildlife hospital. He learned to care for injured wombats, orphan wallabies, sick possums. He studied animal behavior, learned first aid techniques, attended workshops on wildlife conservation. His job as a logistics coordinator paid the bills, but his volunteer work gave him something more important: purpose. One evening, Sarah called him into her office. She had a visitor with her, an older Aboriginal man Ronald recognized. "Jack Henderson." The man introduced himself. "I'm the one who saw your truck that day and called it in." "I never got to thank you properly," Ronald said, shaking his hand. "Sarah tells me you become quite the wildlife carer." Jack said, "I'm learning." Jack smiled. "I run cultural awareness programs for tourists and schools, teaching them about Aboriginal connection to country, about respecting wildlife. I could use someone with your experience, someone who understands the deep bond between humans and animals. You want me to speak at these programs?" "I want you to share your story," Jack said, "about the Joey that came to you for help, about the journey you took together, about what you learned." Ronald looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Stories change people," Jack continued. "They open hearts and minds. Your story could help people see kangaroos differently, see all wildlife differently, not as pests or resources, but as neighbors sharing this land with us." Ronald thought about the mother kangaroo, about her final gift to her baby, about the courage of one small Joey that changed his life. "I'd be honored," he said. The following month, Ronald gave his first presentation to a group of school children. He brought photos, showed them the journey on a map, explained what he'd learned about kangaroo behavior and conservation. The children listened with rapt attention. Afterward, a young girl approached him. "Mr. Morby, when I grow up, I want to help animals like you do." Ronald knelt down to her level. "Then you will," he said, "and you'll be great at it." As he drove home that evening, Ronald's phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Check the tracking data. Your Joey's doing well. 3 months pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather." Ronald pulled over to read the message again, a smile spreading across his face. Life continuing. The circle unbroken. He thought back to that sweltering January day when a small shadow had darted onto the highway. How easily he could have driven around it, dismissed it as just another piece of Outback wildlife. Instead, that moment had changed everything. Changed him. Ronald looked out at the sunset, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Somewhere out there, in the protected grasslands, a young kangaroo he'd helped save was building a life, starting a family. And Ronald understood now what Sarah's grandmother had meant about the kangaroo people being sacred. It wasn't about worship or mysticism. It was about connection, about recognizing that every life has value, every creature deserves compassion, and that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with a single act of kindness. Ronald started his truck and continued toward home. Tomorrow he'd return to the wildlife hospital. There would be more animals needing care, more lives to save, more stories to share. But tonight, he'd think about a brave little Joey and the incredible journey they'd shared. If this journey with Ronald and the baby kangaroo moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who loves animals, and subscribe to True Animal Heroes for more real-life rescue stories. And in the comments, tell us what moment surprised you most, and he'd be grateful.